Underwood and Flinch contains adult themes. Listener discretion is advised. Underwood paused for a puff on his cigar, then he continued. Matthias spoke up. "It wasn't the devil," says he. "It was a bat, or a kind of bat creature." Well, this made more sense to me. I'd considered giant snakes, lions, and tigers. Why not a giant bat creature? It was a classic case of mariners stumbling into here be dragons territory, and I even suggested that it might have been a dragon, but Matthias was adamant. "So what did you do?" "Well, I said we should flee for all we were worth, because whatever this thing was, devil, bat, or dragon, it knew where we were, and it was seemingly intent on coming back to pick us all off one by one." Matthias, being a bright lad, agreed, but Rudge, being an idiot, pointed his gun at us and said we were going nowhere. We were still his prisoners. Of course, I remonstrated emphatically with the man, told him the game had changed and that we had to work together if we were to survive. Well, he chewed this over for a moment. Then he gave me a queer look, like an idea had bobbed up into that fat head of his that would serve him well, but which boded ill for me. I should have been more wary, of course, but I thought our shared peril was such that only a complete idiot would have had other ideas about how to survive. But then, I suppose in all that excitement, I'd forgotten who I was dealing with. Rudge nodded, suddenly Mr. Cooperative, and I turned to Matthias. I started saying something to him about direction or something, when I saw his expression change to one of alarm. Well, the next thing, there was a blow to the back of my head, and everything went black. "Rudge had clocked you one." "Yes, that he had, the blighter. I imagine he would have killed me under different circumstances, but as it happened, it suited his plans better if I was alive. As I say, I passed out. When I awoke, the sun was high in the sky, and I had a splitting headache. I felt the back of my head and found a bump about the size of an egg. I tried to sit up, and I felt fresh pain from my torso. I looked down to see my chest and stomach were covered in dried blood. My blood. Rudge had torn open my shirt and slashed me across the torso in 3 places. Underwood drew his finger across his chest and stomach in 3 diagonal lines to illustrate. They weren't serious cuts. They were intended to make me bleed, not die. This was obviously Rudge's big idea. Had the creature returned to the camp, he would have found me, marinating in my own juice, as it were, and taken me, rather than go chasing after them. Though, fortunately for me, our flying friend had obviously had his fill for that night. So, anyway, I got to my feet, putting all this together in my head, and looking around to see if Rudge had left anything useful behind in the campsite. The remains of their dinner lay scattered around, and I gathered up the bones for a breakfast of seagull scraps. I was absolutely ravenous, and ate everything that remained bar the feathers. I found a canteen and washed my breakfast down with all the water that was left in it, and then, once I was fed and watered, I began to check the other stuff that had been left behind, and there was plenty of it. Besides the canteen, Rudge had left Dodd and DeMatos' muskets, along with their ramrods, a cutlass sheathed in its scabbard, Dodd's hat, and a satchel containing powder and shot and some scraps of beef jerky. I took the better of the muskets and pretty much everything else, then set off after Rudge and Matthias. It wasn't hard to find their trail. Rudge had left the place with all the stealth of a bull elephant with a firework up its arse. The sun was past the meridian, so they had a pretty good head start on me, but I felt if I hurried there was still a good chance I could catch up with them. The pirates had rowed that boat of theirs a fair way into the inlet, and if Rudge had reached it this morning at low tide, there was a possibility that it'd be left high and dry. Either they'd have to carry the boat down to the water, or wait for the tide to come and free them. I ran on through the jungle. I found a stream and refilled the canteen. I had my bearings now, and I soon came to the clearing where we had spied on the pirates on the evening of our arrival. I looked down to where their boat had been moored. It was still there, but curiously the tide was in. That didn't make sense. Why hadn't they taken it? Could it be a trap? It didn't matter. I still had to get down there, and fast. I loaded my musket and ran on. When I came to where the jungle met the beach, I approached with caution. I could see the rowing boat through the foliage, but there was no one anywhere near it, nor anywhere else that I could detect. I made my move. I burst out of the jungle, gun raised and ready. But there was no ambush, no shots fired, just tracks leading to the boat and then away down the beach towards the mouth of the inlet. I went to the boat and saw to my astonishment that it was flooded. It had been holed, and through the hole I could see a bloody great rock that would have taken at least 2 men to lift and throw down hard enough to smash through the wood. Could they have done it themselves? Why would they do that? The only thing that made any sense was that our predator had done it to prevent us from leaving. The thought made me sick with fear, and I looked up to the sky. The sun was sinking towards the reddening horizon. It wouldn't be long before it was dark. I ran on, following the tracks along the beach. As I grew nearer the mouth of the inlet, so the open view of the sea widened. With every step I expected to see the Fortuna anchored offshore, but there was no sign of her. Had Verlaine taken them off with another rowing boat, set sail and gone? Could I really be too late? I tried not to think about that possibility. I hurried on, out of the inlet, and onto the long white coastal beach. The footprints led away to the south, and I saw, with a sense of tremendous relief, a thin finger of smoke rising above the trees about a mile further on. I ran on through the gathering dusk, and as I rounded a curve on the shoreline, I saw the distant flickering light of their campfire. I crouched and made my way nearer, clinging to the tree line where the jungle met the beach. I was soon able to make out the forms of both Matthias and Rudge. At a distance, they appeared to be in an odd cage, but as I grew closer, I could see that they sat in the middle of a copse of long, spiked stakes. Essentially what they had done was fashion about 10 or 12 of these stakes, each perhaps 6 or 7 feet in length, driven the bases into the sand, and aimed the pointed ends up at the sky. Obviously a defence against the bat creature, and in fairness, it was a pretty sound idea. Anyway, it was now dark. I saw that Rudge had dampened down the fire and was cooking something over the coals. As I came upon a fallen tree, the tantalizing smell of roasting fish reached me. If my next move went well, it had been me tucking into that fish in a few moments, and not Rudge. I crouched down behind the tree trunk and peered over at them. Matthias was tied and had his back to me, while Rudge was paying attention to the fish. I was close enough to get a good, clean shot. I ran out my musket and took careful aim. I'd only get one chance. I lined up with Rudge's head, held my breath, and squeezed the trigger. The musket fired, a great boom and flash in the serenity of the evening. I couldn't see through the powder smoke, but I heard Rudge's scream. Whether he was mortally injured or just winged, I couldn't tell. Either way, I had no option now but to have at him. I drew my sword and leapt up. Rudge was roaring like a lunatic and clutching at the side of his head. I started running at them. He saw me, snatched up his own sword, and broke from the nest of spikes to meet me. I could see dark liquid running from the side of his head as we charged at each other across the sand, the pair of us roaring for blood. There must have been only 15 feet between us when, quite without warning, the horror descended upon us. Underwood shook his head in amazement. Even now, just thinking of it, I can feel again my initial shock and horror at the sight of the creature. There was, as I say, no warning. 1 second Rudge had been running at me, his face all knotted with hate and fury. The next, he's falling forwards like he's tripped over a piece of driftwood. But then I saw something huge and black following him down, almost like the night itself was riding his back. I stopped fast, tumbling head over heels onto the sand, and as I came up onto my feet, I saw it. It was as Matthias had said, some species of giant bat. It was incredibly fast, like an eagle snatching a fish from a river. The creature knocked Rudge down, its claws in his shoulders, then it threw its wings back. I looked at Rudge. His face was shocked and confused. Then he was curtained behind a flash of blackness as the creature beat its wings. A blast of wind sent sand into my face, momentarily blinding me. I heard Rudge scream as I wiped frantically at my eyes, and when I opened them again, he was gone. His sword lay on the beach like a marker to where he had fallen. Then I heard him cry from far away over the jungle. The sound died away. I listened for more, but there was only the crash and sigh of the surf behind me. I ran over to Matthias. I fear I may have been a bit hysterical. I cut him loose, babbling about the monster and how we had to make a run for it. All the time he was shouting "No" at me, but I wasn't listening. Then he seized one of the stakes and thrust it into my face, shouting, "John, will you look at this?" And I looked. "These things work," says he. "The bat waited till Rudge was out from them before it attacked." Well, that may or may not have been the case, but either way I still wanted to get away from there. But Matthias persisted. He said that where we were, the stakes afforded us a means of protection, but in the jungle we'd have none. We didn't know the island at all, but the creature did. Furthermore, we had no means of finding our way in the dark. And again, the creature evidently did. Our best bet for survival was to stay where we were and make a stand. Well, by now I'd calmed down a bit. I looked at the stakes, and I had to admit he was right. They did offer a solid defence. We also had guns, swords, and fire. And to be honest, the smell of that cooking fish was driving me mad. So I relented, and we sat down to eat, and he told me everything that had happened since we were parted. Rudge had rifle-butted me and cut me up for the bat creature. Then they'd left immediately. They'd found the holed boat at sunrise and gone on to the coast to try to find the Fortuna, but she'd gone. Rudge figured Verlaine had either gone off after another quarry or taken flight at the sight of a navy ship, but either way they'd be back. He'd made a signal fire, then spent the rest of the day fashioning the defensive spikes. As night had been drawing in, Matthias had begun to grow worried about what Rudge's plans for their sleeping arrangements might involve. Rudge had been giving him odd looks across the fire as he cooked the fish. But then the next thing, there was the sound of a shot, and his ear disappeared in a spray of blood. Underwood laughed. Oh, he laughed at that. Matthias had been overjoyed, of course, and, well, I was pretty bloody chuffed myself. Underwood pointed at David with his cigar. "Don't misunderstand me, Flinch. We were glad to see the back of Rudge, but we didn't celebrate the nature of his demise. Neither of us would have wished that on anyone. Anyway, we chatted on for a while, but eventually, once the fish was eaten and our defensive preparations had been made, there was nothing else to do but to try and sleep in shifts. I took first watch and was happy to find a pipe and tobacco in Rudge's satchel. However, I'd no sooner lit the thing when the jungle fell silent. Immediately I shook the lad awake, and in a moment we were up and on our feet and aiming at the sky through the nest of spikes. We didn't have long to wait before a patch of darkness among the stars began to grow larger, rushing down at us. I fired at it. There was a shriek. I'd hit it. Then Matthias fired too. Immediately the pall of gun smoke over us was blown away by a fierce downrush of wind as the creature shot back up into the night. We reloaded, each of us with one eye on the sky in case it came again, but it didn't. We knew we hadn't killed it, but we were pretty damn sure we'd seen it off for the night. Oh, we were jubilant, laughing with relief, telling each other how we'd probably hit it in the undercarriage and sent it off with a new set of lead bollocks. Underwood chuckled and took a puff on his cigar. David let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Blimey. So, was that it for the night? Underwood shook his head. No. After a while, we settled down again. Matthias lay down to get some sleep, and I sat watching the sky. I don't know if you've ever tried to watch the sky for any period of time, Flinch, but it doesn't take long before your neck and eyes get tired from all the damn looking up. I tried shifting my position various ways, but finally decided to lie down on my back. It was much more comfortable, but obviously unwise. I closed my eyes, just to rest them, and almost immediately sleep began to pull me down. I forced myself to move, to open my eyes, and when I did, I noticed the queerest thing. What? A ground mist had settled all around me. This might have not been that uncanny, but for the fact that there was a steady breeze blowing in from the sea. Yet this mist seemed wholly undisturbed by it. It was eerie, unnatural. It clung to the sand, moving like a carpet of vaporous snakes. I sat up, my skin prickling with goosebumps, and my every instinct screaming at me to get up and get the hell away from it. Was it my sudden movement, or perhaps the quickening of my pulse? I don't know, but it sensed I was alarmed by it. David frowned. It what? It sensed I was alarmed by it. As I tried to rise, faster almost than I could comprehend, it rose around me, thickening, flowing up, over and above me, and the higher it got, the hotter it got, until it was almost scorching. My eyes were burning, and I closed them. I tried to run, but I was suddenly seized, my shoulders crushed in the agonizing grip of taloned claws, and I felt myself lifted from the ground. I didn't need to see what was happening to know that somehow I was in the clutches of the bat. I opened my eyes. I was rising incredibly, sickeningly fast. Far below my flailing legs I could see the camp, the stakes blasted apart and scattered like matchwood. And then we were over the jungle, the tops of the trees rushing beneath me. It was an unimaginable nightmare, made all the worse by the knowledge of certain death that waited at its end. I screamed. Underwood shook his head. I suppose to Matthias it must have sounded like the dwindling screams of all the others, the last terrible cry of the doomed. He puffed his cigar. "Bloody hell," said David. "So what did you do?" "What could I do? I just hung there, begging Jesus to save me, and watching helplessly as we climbed to the highest point of the island. There, the creature began to circle around a clearing in the trees. At the centre of the clearing, the moonlight revealed a tangle of bushes, and at their centre, a sinister slash of blackness that I realized was a hole in the ground. The creature banked and came in again, heading straight for the clearing, and I suddenly felt sure it was going to try and hurl me straight into the hole. I struggled and tried to fight, to somehow put it off its aim, but I had no strength, and every kick I gave tore the flesh of my shoulders. So I just closed my eyes and waited for it, the wind rushing against me, roaring louder in my ears as we dived. And then I was falling. I opened my eyes to see the ground rushing up. Not the hole, thank Christ, but the bushes. I barely had time to cover my eyes before I was crashing through them. They broke my fall, but I landed badly. A fresh, white-hot agony shot from my ankle. I looked at it and almost fainted on seeing the horrible angle of my foot. I could hear the wings above me as, swearing and cursing, I scrabbled around in the dark for a weapon. But all I could find was sticks and stones. And then I heard the creature come to ground a short distance behind me. I turned and saw it enfold itself in its great black wings. I had a short stick in my fist, and I raised it threateningly. It wasn't exactly a dagger, but it'd stab a lot better than my bare hands would. Amazing how we cling to the hope of survival. At that stage I still believed I had a chance. But that belief began to crumble then, as I saw the creature's wings beginning to disintegrate before my eyes, like ashes caught in an eddy of wind. And I saw then that it wasn't just the wings, but the whole of the creature's body, coming apart and swirling like black smoke. Instinctively, I began to push myself away from it. I turned to see where I was going, and saw that I was moving toward the hole. I stopped and looked back. The creature's form was settling, like a swarm of black flies, into the shape of a man. He was stooped, head hung down, his features gradually becoming clearer as the blackness faded from him. He was a native of that part of the world, brown-skinned, black-haired, perhaps Taino or Carib. He was scrawny of build, not really much to him at all, but his eyes shone in the dark like those of a wolf, and when he turned them on me, I felt my flesh almost trying to crawl away from them. He was stark naked, and he had long, scraggy hair and a thin, wispy beard. The nails of his fingers and toes were long and thick and black with filth, more like claws than nails. And when he saw that I'd buggered my ankle, he smiled, and I saw his long yellow fangs. Jesus Christ, I thought, what corner of hell had this devil crawled from? For now I was beginning to think Rudge had been right. This was nothing made by the hand of God. This was the work of Satan. Instinct compelled me to get up, screamed at me to get up. I tried to make it using one leg, ignoring the pain from my broken ankle, and I managed to get up. But as soon as I tried to take a step, of course I came down again. It was impossible. I turned back to the creature. He was advancing slowly, his hands up before him, but not in fists, but with the nails forward, like he meant to stick 'em into me. I raised my stick-knife. This did nothing but amuse him, and I started shouting at him then, as one might with a wild animal, to try and make it think twice about attacking me. And for a moment I thought it might even be working. He hesitated, watching me, head on one side, like he was trying to understand. Of course he wasn't. He was just enjoying the show. That leering smile of his had slowly crept back onto his face, and those strange, inhuman eyes seemed to glow even brighter. And then I remember I couldn't tear my eyes away from them. Everything else just seemed to fade away. My fear, my predicament, my pain, none of it seemed real any more. My mind went blank. And as the creature closed in on me, I just lay there. I had no will to resist. Indeed, I had no sense of why I might even want to. I knew, though I didn't know how I knew, that this creature was going to soothe away all the pain and the fear and the horror. All I had to do was yield to him. He climbed onto me, sniffing at me as he crawled up the length of my body, till it came to my throat. I didn't like this, but I couldn't lift a finger to stop him. And when he closed his filthy hand over my face to ease it aside, I suddenly remembered I wanted to scream, to shout and kick, but I couldn't move. I felt his hot, fetid breath on my throat, and then the searing pain as his teeth bit into me. Underwood had been staring ahead, his expression becoming increasingly distressed as he relived the assault, but at the memory of the bite he turned away. David waited. Underwood took a moment to compose himself, then took a breath and turned back with an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that, Flinch. I haven't been back there for a while. Forget how bloody awful that blighter was." He reached for the brandy and poured himself a generous measure. David nodded. "Not wanting to be insensitive or anything, sir, but I imagine it must be the same for your victims." Underwood took a deep swallow of brandy, then smacked his lips. "For some, but not for all. I can make death a pleasure or a torment. Even my hideous experience wasn't all bad." David was surprised. "Really?" "Yes. The pain of the bite only lasted a moment. It was as if I'd been injected with some kind of opium. A sense of bliss flooded me. Then the creature faded away, and Martha was there. Martha at my throat. kissing me. I could even smell her hair as I closed my eyes and sank into blackness. When I next opened my eyes, it was to an even deeper blackness. The air around me was cold, dank, and there was a thick, awful stench, worse than anything I think I'd ever smelled in my life. The only sound was the buzzing of flies. The floor beneath me was incredibly uncomfortable, like lying on a heap of shattered cartwheels. I felt my neck, where the creature had bitten me. It was sticky with blood, but weirdly, there was no wound. The skin had healed. I tried to sit up, and my head swam. The ground beneath me shifted painfully, digging into me. I fell back down and reached around. I picked up the first thing my hand fell upon. It was like a stick. I felt along its length to the knobbly joint at the end, and realized that it was a bone. I dropped it in horror, crying out and trying to push away from it. Flies erupted from all around me, and the ground shifted again. More bones, hundreds of them, cracking and scraping against each other. I put my hand in something soft and wet. I slipped in it, and my face came down on something hard and spherical. I felt it. It was a skull, but not human, animal. However, I had no doubt that many of these bones were human, because as I continued to grope my way through the dark, I could feel fabric, cotton, leather, and then something metal. I closed my fingers around it, and it took a moment for my mind to register the pain. It was the blade of a cutlass. Even though I'd cut my hand on it, I was overjoyed to have found a weapon. I think I must have given some yelp of delight, because a voice then came at me from the blackness ahead. "Who's there?" It was hoarse, weak, but I'd know it anywhere. "Rudge?" "Brooks? Thank God. You gotta help me. The devil's broke my fucking leg. He's been feeding off me, drinking my blood." I told him I'd experienced the same. "I heard him come in with you," said he. "Heard him chuck you down over there. I didn't know what it was, though. I just played dead and prayed he'd fuck off again. And so he did." "Where is he?" I asked. "How the fuck do I know? I can't see a fucking thing. If I tell you he went off that way, does it help?" "What way?" said I. "Exactly, you stupid shithead. I'm pointing, but it don't do neither of us no good, does it?" Fair point, I thought. I crawled across the rotting dead toward the sound of his voice. When I got to him, I asked him if he had anything on his person we could use in our defence. He said he had a knife, but he'd be damned if he'd give it to me. I asked him if he had the means to make a fire, and he said that he did, but I'd be mad if I tried to start a fire in here, because it would attract the devil back to us. "Look," I told him, "that devil's coming back sooner or later, so we can either lie here and wait for him to devour us, or we can draw him in and make some kind of a fight of it." I told him that I had a sword, and I tapped it on the ground so as he'd hear the metal. Then I told him there were enough bones and items of old clothing around to make torches. "Everything's afraid of fire, Rudge," I reminded him, "and I'll bet that devil's no exception." He whined about his leg, begging me to help him out of there, but I told him my ankle was just as crippled, and that the only way we were going to get out of there was if we killed the monster first. Well, he didn't like it. He was utterly terrified of the thing, but I told him my plan, and he finally conceded it was the best, indeed the only chance we had. So I began gathering up the bones and clothes I'd need to make torches. The fabric was old and as dry as parchment, so it would catch as soon as it made contact with a flame. Once the torches were made, Rudge took out his flint, steel, and tinderbox. I'd torn some thin strips of rotten fabric for kindling, and I handed them to him. We offered up a quick prayer, and then I crawled to where I would lie down nearby him, and Rudge began to spark a fire. The sparking of the flint on steel flashed in the darkness, and for split seconds I could glimpse the horror of the charnel pit around me. Then the first torch began to catch, its light glowing and revealing the corpses all around, human and animal, desiccated and rotten, but in the case of some, fresh. The bodies of Cullen, DeMatos and Dodd lay nearby, their throats ripped out and black with flies. Poor old Cullen lay facing us, the tail end of a rat bristling in his mouth as it dined on his tongue. When Rudge saw it, he started screaming, and it took all the guts I had left not to join him. I forced myself to look away. I could see now how the chamber stretched away into the deeper cave. The plan was, on seeing Rudge awake and full of beans, the creature would go for him. As it approached, it'd have to walk past me. The moment it did, I'd lash out with the sword and run it through. And so I lay there, waiting, playing dead as Rudge wailed on. I had one eye open and fixed on the darkness in the deeper cave. For a short time nothing happened, and Rudge's first torch began to die down. Then, as he lit and raised the second torch, I saw those two eerie nocturnal eyes glowing at us from the dark. "Look away," my mind yelled at me, and I tried to, believe me. But it was already too late. I felt a curious sensation, not fear, but comfort, and I realized with numb incredulity that I actually wanted the creature to come to me, to ignore Rudge and to finish what it had started with me earlier on. I didn't know at the time, of course, but that weird attraction was the creature's bite working on me, the first stage of vampiric infection. But still, I had the brains to know it made no sense, that I was looking at certain death, and I fought against it. I remember pressing my face down hard against the rock floor, and the pain brought me back to focus. I clenched my teeth and managed to summon my natural feelings of hatred and fear, and I tightened my grip on my sword and waited. The creature began to move closer. It was still in its human form, and it was staring with curiosity at Rudge's torch. I realized then that it had seen the first one burn out, and was simply waiting for the second one to do the same. I lay as still as a corpse, barely breathing. Rudge shouted at it to come and get him, calling it all manner of names and giving full flow to his unpleasant line in threats. But the creature just watched and waited for the torch to begin to die down. Gradually, the flame burned less brightly, and Rudge's threats and challenges began to lose some of their conviction. As the light began to recede from it, the creature smiled, its teeth glistening in the fading orange glow. It began to move forward, never taking its eyes from the torch. Rudge picked up the third torch and began to touch it to the flickering remains of the second. As the creature grew closer, I looked at the ground, trying to effect a dead man's stare. I listened to its slow, steady footfalls as it grew closer, and I felt my skin tingling at its nearness, as if my traitorous blood was calling out to it. Then I heard the vampire's tread stop. "Come on!" shouted Rudge as a third torch flared up. "Come and get me! Me, damn it! Me!" An icy feeling of absolute terror seized me. Why was Rudge stressing himself as target? Slowly I turned my head. I looked up to see the vampire standing above me, his eyes bright through the tangle of filthy hair that hung down around his face. I tried to raise my sword, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Try as I might, I simply couldn't move. And then I realized he'd known our game all along. But what did it matter, I thought. I found I didn't care anymore. I didn't want to move or to escape. I wanted it to take me. "Me!" Rudge shouted. Then I heard the torch roar through the air in the moment before it struck the vampire's head in a shower of sparks. Its hair caught like tinder, and the vampire went berserk, whirling around with its hands flailing at its head. The spell on me was broken. My hand closed tightly on the sword handle, and I lunged up, stabbing him in the back and pushing the blade into the hilt. It screamed again and twisted, pulling the sword from my grip. I watched as it dropped to its knees, blood gurgling at its throat as its hands groped blindly behind its back for the sword handle. They faltered, as if giving up, then ceased altogether. The vampire pitched forward on its face, and the sword was pushed back through its body. It tottered for a moment, then clattered free of the wound. "We did it!" Rudge shouted. "We got the bastard!" Words cannot convey what we felt at that moment. We both cheered and swore and congratulated ourselves on our amazing deed, until we saw the torch was dying. Rudge lit another, and I began to drag myself over to him, telling him that the next thing we needed to do was splint our legs with bones and try to find our way out of there. He was just getting the next torch to catch when we heard a shifting of bones behind us. We turned, and in the slowly flaring light, we saw it. The vampire stood where it had fallen, and I saw with utter disbelief that the hair that had been burned from its head a few minutes ago was now completely restored. It smiled at us, and before I could even blink, it had leapt over the space between us and was upon me. Its foot struck my broken ankle, and I screamed, pain all-consuming, blinding me to all other senses. I was barely aware of its weight upon me, barely sensed its hands upon my shoulder and face, pushing my head back and exposing my throat, and when it sank its teeth into me, I was grateful for the opiate bliss that flooded my system from the bite. So quickly I felt myself slipping away, the darkness and horror of the cave giving way to the bright blue sky of a spring day, and Martha in my arms again, so happy to see me. I reached up to touch her face, but then she seemed to spasm, her face contorting with pain. I felt distress. I ached to help her. I tried to get up, and the cave returned in all its horror. Rudge was roaring beside me, his hand in the creature's hair, pulling its head back from me. Its teeth and beard were glistening with my blood, and its eyes were wide and unbelieving. And then I saw why. The blade of the cutlass was sawing through its neck from behind. I could hear the flesh, bone and sinew tearing, feel the vibration of the hacking cuts through the creature's body. Then its blood was splattering down onto my face in torrents. I turned my face away just as the blade came hacking through the last remaining tissue, and Rudge ripped the head away. The headless corpse dropped on top of me, blood still spurting from severed arteries and gushing into my mouth, nose, eyes, and ears. I was drowning in it. How much of the vile stuff I swallowed I cannot say, but I remember it went down the throat in a similar fashion to this stuff. Underwood waggled his brandy glass. Like alcohol, it burned my throat and put heat in my belly. Then that heat bloomed through my body, and I remember everything went woozy. I remember seeing Rudge propping himself up and holding the severed head aloft by its hair. Oh, he was roaring, victorious, but to me it was almost like he was under water. I'm dying, I thought, and my head fell to one side, and I watched as the torch that lay sizzling in blood beside me finally sputtered out. Underwood took a puff on his cigar. It had gone out. He considered it for a moment and then threw it out into the night. He sighed. When I awoke, I knew only one sensation. Hunger. But it was unlike any hunger I had ever felt before. My stomach was cramping, a terrible pain. It caused me to double up in agony. I felt like I'd been poisoned. Then I remembered that I'd drunk the creature's blood. Could it have been poisonous? It must have been. I looked at Rudge. He appeared to be unconscious, slumped against the wall with the vampire's head still on his lap. Everywhere was the reek of its blood, but far from repelling me, as one might expect from the odour of poison, it seemed to draw me. I bent to the headless corpse and sniffed at the stump of neck. My body seemed to yearn for it, as if the hunger I felt were reaching for the source of the odour, and without even knowing what I was doing, I licked at the torn flesh. My craving responded immediately. Yes, this was what my body wanted. I sucked at the flesh, but it was dead. The blood didn't flow. I lapped at the sticky pool of blood that had coagulated where the neck had bled out, and I felt the waves of pain softening, easing with every drop I swallowed. But it was a pitiful amount, and soon I was lapping at the rock floor. I groaned, angry and frustrated. I hardly noticed Rudge stir. Then he spoke.
"Brooks, that's you? I thought you were dead."
I looked at him. He was staring into space like a blind man, his eyes darting about like they were trying to find me. I realized how I must look, my face bent to a pool of gore on a cave floor. I quickly got to my feet and stepped away from the corpse. "Aye," I replied, "it's me, not dead yet." His eyes darted in the direction of the words I'd uttered, but they still had that frightened, sightless look. Was he blind, I wondered? I looked around me at the bodies of the dead, the walls of the cave, the way the cave opened out in 2 directions, and how in one there was a dim glow, as if there was light coming in from far away. But that didn't make sense, because there was light. If there wasn't, then how on earth could I see? And then I realized I was standing on an ankle that had been horribly broken. I dropped to my haunches and felt of the joint. It was healed, intact, like the bones had knitted from memory rather than from a doctor's setting. I fell back, repelled, as if my own leg was somehow alien to me. I must have cried out because Rudge shouted at me to stop fucking about and come and help him. I looked at him with his frightened face and his hands held out into the air before him.
"Come on, damn it!" he shouted. "We gotta fix our legs and get out of here!"
I walked over to him and took his hand. The warmth of it sent a shiver through me, and I closed it in both of mine. I could feel the rush of life within him, the blood singing in his veins. He looked in my direction, still blind, his face confused. He pulled his hand back from me.
"What you doing?"
And to tell you the truth, I honestly didn't know. I knelt down by his side and raised my hand close to his face, feeling the warmth that radiated from him. I held out my palm about an inch from the surface of his skin and moved my hand slowly, caressing his heat, his life force. I noticed its subtle variations and how it radiated with tantalizing vigor from the arteries on his neck. And again I felt stirrings of that strange new hunger. Suddenly I noticed a sound, a ticking. Once I'd noticed it, it seemed to become louder, as though it were demanding my attention. My eyes went to the source, and I saw my watch chain, still attached to Rudge's vest. Without a second thought, I snatched it from him.
"Hey!" he cried. "You give me that back!"
I said nothing. I opened the watch case, and in what I now knew was pitch darkness, I read the inscription inside.
"Give me it back, you fucker, or I'll give you what I gave that fucking cave monster!"
His hand groped around for the sword. I saw it about a foot away from where his hand was. I kicked it away. His face turned to the sound, then became angry.
"You double-crossing bastard, Brooks! What's your game? I saved your fucking life!"
"Aye, Rudge, so you did," says I. "But this is my watch." I watched 100 emotions flicker across his face as he weighed this unexpected development. He obviously thought I was as blind as he was, and his face betrayed everything he was thinking. I could see his intentions developing as clearly as if he had been drawing me pictures. Oh yes, he'd go along with my taking the watch for now, but sure as eggs are eggs, he'd cut my throat the first chance he got. He grinned before settling his face onto something close to resignation.
"All right," says he. "Fair is fair. You keep it. I didn't much like it anyway. Now, come and give us a hand splinting my leg."
He reached out a hand in my direction. I looked at it and considered for a moment. It represented so much. If I took it, what would happen to me, to Matthias? And if I didn't take it, what would happen to Rudge? The man had, after all, saved my life. But curiously, this very human dilemma didn't trouble me at all. I walked over to where I'd kicked the sword, picked it up, walked back to Rudge, and chopped his hand off. Blood erupted from the wound, and before I even knew what I was doing, I had grabbed his wrist and lifted it to my open mouth. His blood gushed over my tongue, and I drank it, ravenously and without thought, just obeying some new instinct that now seemed to be commanding my decisions. Rudge must have been in shock, for he just sat there with a stupefied look on his face. He tried to pull his arm back, and instinctively I bit down on it. And that broke his stupor. He ripped it from me, and I felt his flesh tear on my teeth. I touched my teeth with my tongue and felt the extended canines, long and sharp, as the teeth of the creature had been. Rudge roared and struck out at me with his good hand, but I caught it before it made contact and snapped it down savagely, breaking his wrist. David winced. I climbed onto Rudge's legs, ignoring his screams as my weight came down on the broken one, and I reached out for his bleeding stump. I got a hold on it, but it was slippery, and when he pulled it away, I lost my grip. Anger flashed in me, but only for a moment. There was, after all, another source. I pushed his head back against the wall and bent to his neck at the point where I had felt his life force was at its strongest, and with no thought whatsoever, I sank my teeth into his throat. His whole body spasmed, and he tried to pull away, but he was hopelessly pinned and bleeding to death. All he could do was twitch and jerk until the euphoria began to spread through him. Then he grew calmer, and after a few moments, in a childlike voice not much louder than a whisper, he began to sing to himself. Underwood swirled the brandy in his glass, then took a sip. I drank from him till his heart stopped. Once the pump stops, that's it. But I was glutted, full to bursting. I sat there for a while, my eyes closed and my head resting on his shoulder, just feeling this, I don't know, radiance. I felt a glow, all my senses thrumming in a way I'd never experienced. Ironically, perhaps, I felt more alive than ever before. You see the irony, Flinch, what with you and others always supposing that vampires are dead. David nodded. Yeah, I get it. Underwood chuckled. Well, anyway, so, yes, I sat there, glutted and aglow with Rudge's blood, and, well, I suppose in some ways that now I had fed and was satiated, I was reluctant to lift my head and see what I'd done to the poor chap. But eventually I did open my eyes, and what I saw so struck me I quite forgot everything else. It was as bright as day. Well, sort of. There was light, but no colour. It was as it had been after I'd drunk the vampire's blood, but much brighter, much more vivid. I realised now that, having fed, I was fully restored, like a battery on full charge, if you like. Rudge's freshly spilled blood was almost vibrant to look at, and the odour was heady, stronger than anything else in the cave. For then, you see, I noticed there were a million odours in the cave that I hadn't noticed before. When I was human, all I'd been able to smell in there was rotting flesh and dankness. But now I was aware of a million subtle nuances of scent. I could smell not just the dead, but the degrees of their decomposition, and beyond that, I could smell both fresh air and something else, a mustier aroma. I smelt the same thing on the creature, but what drifted to me now was more concentrated. The human thing to do would have been to go towards the fresh air, but my new instincts compelled me in the other direction. I wanted to know more about the creature that had attacked me, and I felt sure that I'd find some answers at the source of that smell. I got up and picked up the sword just in case he had a mate or something down there, and began to follow the scent. The charnel cavern didn't continue for very far, but random bones littered the way, sometimes grotesquely arranged. I went on, rats scurrying at the sight of me, and the smell thickening with every step. I was beginning to wonder just how far it went when, suddenly, I found it.
Found what?
Underwood grinned. The vampire's lair. It was a chamber that branched off from the main passage, curtained by a ship's sail. I went inside, and what I saw fairly made my head spin. David sat forward.
What? What was in there?
It was the creature's hoard, obviously taken from ships, their crews and passengers over God knows how many years. He had all sorts of junk in there, from fabrics and clothes to ornaments and weapons. The clothes and fabrics lay scattered all over the place, coats, shirts, dresses and trousers, all filthy and mouldering to various degrees. And I remember there was a great heap of matted silk in one corner of the chamber. That was where the stink was at its strongest. It was obviously the creature's bed. But that was all just so much trash. I was far more interested in the other stuff. The ornaments and weapons? Yes, Underwood smiled. And the rest. You see, my late friend seemed to have had a predilection for crafted things, delicate objects, smooth metals, things made of glass or porcelain, and so on. It was all laid out around the chamber, some of it heaped, some of it arranged decoratively, as it might be in any home. However, the creature's idea of what constituted tasteful was somewhat at odds with anything I'd ever encountered in an English home.
Like what?
Like a row of children's skulls with polished gemstones set in the eye sockets. That was the centerpiece. David started slightly. Gemstones? Yes, gemstones. Diamonds, emeralds, rubies, sapphires, you know.
So what, there was treasure in there?
Oh, yes. I mentioned the smooth metals, didn't I?
You mean gold?
Gold, silver, brass and steel, but, yes, what has your eyebrows raised now is exactly what had my jaw dropped at the time. There was a fortune in gold coins, plate, watches, jewellery casings, and all manner of other pieces. It was like I'd stumbled upon Aladdin's cave. At this point, David's jaw also dropped.
How much? I mean, what sort of value?
Oh, God, far more than I could calculate. It was more than I'd ever imagined. More perhaps than any pirate had ever imagined, and certainly more than any pirate had ever possessed. I dropped to my knees and began sifting through it, trying to get a sense of how much was there. And the further I went through it, the older I noticed the dates and heads on the coins got. I began to wonder if perhaps my friend had been the last in a long line of creatures such as himself, for naturally it never occurred to me for a moment that he might be immortal. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, in addition to valuables, there were weapons. Not any old rubbish. The cutlass I'd found in the charnel cave was old and rusty, but this stuff was all fine, polished steel, rapiers, sabres, daggers, some with jewelled handles. There were also pistols, one of which struck me as a very handsome piece. It was a double-barrelled flintlock. I'd heard of such things, but I'd never seen one before. I gave it a closer inspection and noticed that it was made by Underwood and Sons of Birmingham. David grinned.
Really?
Yes, lovely gun. As I handled it, I wondered at what kind of journey it had undergone en route to that foul-smelling resting place. I sniffed the barrels. It had been fired, but not for a very long time. Well, I thought, this is far too fine a pistol to end its days here. I went to put it in my belt, And that's when I realized just how smothered I was in gore. I stripped off and rooted among the clothes that lay heaped around the cave until I managed to put together an outfit that both fitted me and didn't stink too unpleasantly. Then I tucked my new pistol into my belt, sheathed a fine Spanish cutlass, and shoved a handful of gold coins into my pocket to show Matthias when I got back to the beach. I then made my way back through the tunnels, enjoying the feel of good solid boots on my feet again. I went back through the charnel cave and then on towards the incoming fresh air and the glow of daylight that grew stronger the nearer I got to it. My head was still reeling with everything that had happened to me, but the one thought that overrode everything else was the fortune that I had just found, and how life in America for Martha and I was going to be so wonderful. We would be rich beyond our wildest dreams and never want for anything ever again. But you were a vampire. Didn't that bother you? What was a vampire? I didn't know. Nobody had ever heard of vampires. All I knew was that I'd been sick, almost killed, and that blood had brought me back to health. I had no reason to believe that it was a permanent change in me. For all I knew, now that I was healed, it was over. The creature's bite had improved me in some ways, yes, but they seemed only beneficial. All in all, I was starting to think my encounter with the creature had been a blessing. David nodded thoughtfully. Anyway, there I was, lost in 1,000 swirling thoughts, when, at the sound of birdsong ahead, I looked up. The light was strong now, almost painfully so. I put it down to my eyes being overly accustomed to the pitch blackness, and, as one does, I shielded my eyes. I hurried on until I saw the entrance to the cave. It was overhead, and the sunlight came streaming down through it like liquid gold. I could feel the heat as I ran to it. I was so happy to see it again, so relieved that I ran straight into it, my face turned up, eager to feel its life-giving warmth once again. Underwood's voice caught on this last word, and his lips tightened. He took a drink of brandy. David could see the memory clearly pained him. "Are you okay, my lord?" "Yes," said Underwood, putting down his glass. "Yes, I'm fine. It's just been a long time, a very long time since I talked about or even thought about that moment. I ran into the sunlight, and it was like running into a cascade of fire. I burst into flames, Flinch, or at least my exposed skin did. Thank God I'd put those clothes on. My eyes were open, shielded by my hand, but it made no difference. They burned as well. My face, my hair, my hands. I fell back into the cave, screaming, beating and pounding at myself. I could feel my clothes burning, and I dropped, rolling around on the ground until all the flames were extinguished. I could hear my flesh sizzling, smell the smoke from it thick in my nose. Underwood closed his eyes and pressed a hand to his forehead, clearly shaken by the memory. David didn't know what to say. He waited. Underwood said nothing for a few moments. Then he took a deep breath and continued. I lay there, screaming, and not just because of the physical pain. I was screaming because I realized that what had happened to me at the hands of that creature wasn't a blessing. It wasn't a miracle, and it wasn't over. I was damned, cursed, forsaken by God, for he himself had scorched me, cast me from his holy light, and forced me back into that Caliban's cave to lie with the rotting dead. The man I had been had died back there in the darkness, and whatever I was now wasn't human. I had become whatever the creature in the cave had been, and now I had replaced him. I was the creature in the cave. I staggered blindly back into the caverns, back into the stinking depths of my new home, consumed with grief and sorrow, not just for me, but for Martha, for Samuel, for the life I knew I had lost and the man I could never be again. My new senses led me back to the creature's nest, and there I crawled onto its grimy bed of silk and wept. I fell asleep eventually, and when I woke again, I was restored. My eyes fluttered open, and they could see again. My flesh had healed, my hair had regrown. Oh, this gave me neither delight nor came as a great surprise. I sat up and was immediately racked by pain from my stomach. I was hungry again. I doubled up in a fetal position. Would it always be this way? Would my every awakening now be to this terrible hunger? Oh, it wouldn't, but I didn't know that then. I didn't know that the process of regeneration and healing had used up all my reserves of strength. Underwood closed his eyes. All I knew was the ferocious and overwhelming need for human blood, and that the only source of sustenance on the island flowed within the veins of Matthias Flinch.